I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce, and this is The Radical Center, a recording project I began in 2022 as a way to describe and discuss the social and ideological currents that are rapidly altering our culture. In a time when political polarization seems to be the norm, I'm seeking to understand rather than react. I'm grateful to all the thoughtful men and women who share their stories and insights with me in this conversation series. If you would like to contribute to this project financially, there are links in the description. Thank you, and thank you all for listening and being part of this exploration. Today I'm speaking with Gabrielle Turner, and this will be our third conversation as we dive into the work of Daryl Wing-Sue and the cultural competency aspect of counselor training. We talked a lot about this last time. We talked a little bit about sexuality, human sexuality as taught in counselor courses, and then we went into some of the book, Counseling the Culturally Diverse. I'm holding a physical copy here, and you've got a PDF that we'll be able to share on the screen as we go through this a little bit. It's such a dense thing. I mean, this book is it has so many things to talk about and areas that are open for criticism and discussion. But we decided for today we were going to zero in on his conceptualization of white racial identity development. And so this is how this is being taught in a lot of counselor education programs right now. If we have time after we go into this, I have a couple of essays that I wrote that are short essays that were journal entries that I was supposed to be doing weekly during the course that I took with this book. And I've got both the response that I gave my essay and then the teacher's response to it, which I think it still shocks me a little bit that this is how we're being taught, but I think it would be illuminating for people to see some of how that is playing out in an actual education situation. So thanks for joining me for another take on this.
Yeah, it's been interesting getting back into it, and oh man, just remembering, just gearing up every week for this class and the reading that I had to do. But it's good to let people understand what's being taught. It's such a little microcosm to me of like larger cultural issues that are interesting, and important for people to know. Potential counseling students for sure. Also, people looking for counseling services. And then also, I think for maybe older clinicians in the field that aren't so familiar with the way that the education has been warped and changed over the years, it's good for them to know, because I do feel like there's a place for clinicians in the field to speak out and demand changes. But you don't know what to ask for if you don't know the way that things have changed under your nose over the last couple decades. So this is part of that.
Absolutely. And I think that, in that same vein with older clinicians and people who are a little bit removed from how counselor education is being conducted right now, some of the complaints from people who've been concerned about it might seem hyperbolic. And so it's helpful to actually get into the concrete material and say, no, this is actually how we're being taught. And it really is this reductive and simplistic. This isn't a reactive characterization of this. This is really the material that we're being taught.
Yeah. So I thought it would be interesting just to kind of lay out the framework of this chapter and talk about why he thinks it's so important. Counseling the Culturally Diverse, the book, is supposed to be educating counseling students for how to most effectively counsel people who come from different racial backgrounds, not just racial backgrounds, but also religious, ethnic. The book has a bunch of chapters, but most of it does center around race. And he's speaking primarily to white people. That's made clear throughout the book, that the counseling field is predominantly, populated by white clinicians. And one of the biggest parts of the chapter is emphasizing in his eyes, the importance of white counselors developing the proper white racial identity. And that's because in this worldview, there's a lot of harm that a counselor can do, damage and harm to their clients, if they don't have a well-developed racial identity. And that's what this chapter is about. It's training counselors for what is the proper racial identity that you need to have in order to be an effective counselor for people of a variety of populations. Mm-hmm. So that's the framing.
And that echoes that was echoed in my class when I would question some of these teachings. What the response was that I needed to re-educate myself so that I didn't harm my clients. It was specifically that if I resisted some of these notions and said, well, some of these behaviors are present in human psychology and human social systems, regardless of race. This was the response I got was, if you don't re-educate yourself, you're going to do harm to your clients.
Yeah, you're going to do harm. And in the chapter, there's one section where he's very explicit about the fact that that this sort of unconscious racism. So what we'll talk about is that the proper white racial identity model is for white people to come to understand their inherent oppressive nature as a white person, mm-hmm. that they harbor biases and prejudices and racist feelings and attitudes towards people. And you have to confront that. You have to uncover it. You have to bring the unconscious conscious. Mm-hmm. And it's only when you can come to see the rot sort of at the center of your soul that then you can be expunged of it somehow. And so he said that as long as you don't believe that you have these instincts inside of you, then you're still in this unformed racial identity. And he makes it very clear that he says that sort of unconscious racism is more damaging than overt racism. So he's telling me, or basically anybody that doesn't buy into this, or doesn't buy into it, but that doesn't actually see inside of themselves the sort of racist, oppressive nature that he's saying exists, mm-hmm. by nature of being white, that you are worse than a person who is an overt racist, mm-hmm. who does harbor conscious aware, thoughts of, superiority and inferiority. And to me, that's just like totally beyond the pale, mm-hmm. beyond the pale. Mm-hmm. And there's no evidence for it at all. But anyway.
Yeah.
So mm-hmm. that's what this chapter is about. It's very much a long struggle session, mm-hmm. of trying to, force white people to uncover. And it kind of reminds me of like things like the repressed memory movement, right? Mm-hmm. It's like you will find inside of yourself some mm-hmm. of these racist beliefs, and if you don't, then you haven't properly done the work.
This is a fantastic example of the rhetorical fallacy called the Kafka trap, where
yes.
denial of something is
evidence of
proof of something. So proof of that thing. So I can say I'm a racist and then I'm a racist. But if I say, no, I'm not a racist, then I'm extra racist. And so there's no way
worse,
out.
Worse racist.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
If you want to put it up on the screen, we can start kind of going through this chapter. And
mm-hmm. Yeah, let me do that. And I have, okay, let's do screens.
It opens with, I'll read the little opening paragraph that he gives for this. There's a list of chapter objectives. I don't know if I'll go ahead and read them. Number 1, acquire understanding of what it means to be white. Be able to discern differences between how whites and people of color see the meaning of whiteness. Analyze resistance by white Americans to identifying themselves as white. Learn the meaning of nested or embedded emotions experienced by whites as they come to accept their whiteness. Define white privilege. Understand how whiteness advantages whites and disadvantages people of color. Describe and discuss the various developmental levels of white racial identity development. Learn how the white how the level of white racial consciousness may affect the counseling process. Understand how white racial identity development may influence the definition of normality/abnormality, assessment, diagnosis, and treatment of culturally diverse clients. Learn what a white person needs to do in order to develop a non-racist and anti-racist white identity. Learn what white helping professionals need to do in order to prevent their whiteness from negatively impacting clients of color. So those are the objectives in this counseling book for
Right.
white people. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So we can go, he starts off, as he often does, with these little vignettes from, apparently real people. And the first couple are from white people, and they basically are kind of confused by the question. He asks, "What does it mean to be white?" And they're both kind of questioned. They're both sort of, confused by the question, as I would have been also.
Yeah. He says he quizzes people in downtown San Francisco. So he's kind of like doing a man on the street interview, accosting random people and asking them, what does it mean to be white?
Yeah, yeah. So this is giving, an example of the unformed racial identity. And then he goes to the last part. He speaks with a black person who then and then he'll go on to make the point that, as the person who's the subject of bias, the black person is better equipped to be able to see and explain what whiteness is, because he's the subject of the oppressive whiteness, which he does. So he has a quotation here about white means having the authority or power to tell me what's really happening, even though I know it's not. Being white means you can fool yourself into thinking you're not prejudiced when you are. That's what it means to be white. And that's basically what Sue's kind of thesis is throughout this chapter, that's the unformed racial identity model. And this is right here. One of the greatest barriers to racial understanding for white Americans is the invisibility of their whiteness. So this is like the Kafka trap, right? Like, when I don't understand the question, like, what does it mean to be white to you? If I'm like, that question doesn't really make sense to me, then that is evidence of, that fact shows that I am oblivious to the way that my whiteness intrudes and disadvantages people of color, and the way and it affects the way that they perceive the world. So, yeah.
I found this very interesting because of its shallowness psychologically. Like, if you look at these questions, he asks four random strangers in San Francisco, what does it mean to be white? One of them is black. The other three are white. He's a male business person, 42 years old, 26-year-old female college student, 34-year-old white female stockbroker, and then a 39-year-old black male salesperson. So these are the people he quizzes. And he's got, these are really brief interactions, except for the black person. He gives him a long, elaborate paragraph, but the white people, it's just, he's coming up and their responses are things like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm Italian, not white. And then he says, well, what does it mean to be Italian? And the guy's like, this is ridiculous, and walks off. And the other people are like, just little things, like one of them says, people are people. I wish we'd just forget about racial differences and see each other as human beings. But from this, he goes into a reflection and discussion, which this is one of the places where this book really shows itself as being very different from other psychological texts, other texts in psychology education. He says he's treating these vignettes as if they are some deep psychological exploration, when they're really, really these very shallow things. Like he says, can you discern any common responses among the three given by white pedestrians? In what ways do they differ? He doesn't have a study here. We don't know how many people he asked. He doesn't say, I surveyed, 300 people, and these represent the common answers. He might have surveyed 10 other people that gave 10 other deeper answers, but these are the ones that he selected because they fit his thesis. We don't know.
Yeah.
This is no data. There's no study being conducted here. But then he goes on to say, how do whites view themselves as racial/cultural beings? Based on these three responses. This is where it's
Yeah.
like, this is not research, and there's no evidence base here. These are a couple of anecdotes, and from that you want us to extrapolate something of meaning about what whiteness really is. He doesn't go into the fact that, like, one of the things I saw here was the guy that says he's Italian. This is a
Mhm.
response that I've given before when trying to talk about what it means to be white is I my skin color might be more similar to someone in Denmark than it is to some people in America that have darker skin than me. But I have
Mhm.
more in common with the other Americans than I have with a
Yeah.
Danish person. I don't know what it means. So when you talk about white, what are you exactly talking about? A white American? Maybe specify that. What does it mean to be white in America? We'll talk about that. But white could be so many different things that it is rather hard to make a broad statement that really fits.
I completely agree. I mean, it's basically saying, what does it mean to have brown hair in America? I mean, I don't know how to answer that question because it's a meaningless it's so broad. There's so many different kinds of people who have brown hair.
Mhm.
Like, I would need to know much more about the context. And yeah, this isn't data. These are anecdotes that's intended to illustrate an ideology and opinion.
Yeah.
And I mean, even if it was a broad survey of, like, 1,000 people in San Francisco, it would have been a survey of people in San Francisco, which has its own local culture, which I imagine, this is part of my feeling, is that these smaller, more localized cultural groups are much more relevant to people, I think, of all races than, you know, whether you're Caucasian or Asian or Black. It's the
Mhm.
local cultural groups that are much more relevant.
Mhm. Mhm.
So,
And there's so much there to talk about. That would have been a really meaningful discussion that could have been prompted by this. It's like, what are
mhm.
all the ways in which this might serve as a representation, and what are some of the ways in which it wouldn't serve as a representation? And that would be more reflective of a typical sort of case conceptualization project in an applied psychology course.
Yeah, yeah, and everybody would have had something to contribute, and it would have been really interesting. It's like, what makes you and I different, even though we look the same. And it's definitely that's the case for all racial groups.
Mhm.
But no, everything needs to just ends up getting slotted into the framework of power dynamics and oppressor oppressed, um, group identity.
Mhm.
Uh, and that's the only acceptable way of talking about race or group differences at all, is through that framework in this book and in the social justice ideology as a whole,
Mhm.
as
Mhm.
far as I can tell, which is
Mhm.
honestly just gets so boring, um, and frustrating.
Yeah. So you
So
highlighted some things here.
yeah, I mean,
What's
I ended
important?
up highlighting a bunch of things, and I don't know that I would want to go through all of these. There's a couple of things, um, that he does say, and he'll throw out some of these things with, again, no evidence whatsoever. Um, Persons of color find white culture quite visible because even though it is nurturing to white Euro Americans, it may invalidate the lifestyles of multicultural populations. Like, to
Yeah.
me, this is such gobbledygook. White culture is nurturing to white Euro Americans. I mean, he certainly has not even defined white culture. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that invalidates lifestyles of multicultural populations. I
There's
genuinely
no
don't know what he's
citation.
talking about.
He
No,
doesn't
there's no
elaborate.
citation.
Yeah. The only citation in that paragraph, if you notice, is one of the things that I've criticized about his work is that it's a self-citation.
Self-citation,
It's
a lot of this
circular.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Sue
And
2004. He's citing
2004.
himself in that statement.
Yeah.
Whites are taught to think of their lives as morally neutral, average, and ideal.
Average and
Sue
ideal.
2004.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's what he says.
that's yeah, like I said that.
Yeah. It's so okay. And then, down here the same place. Um, People of color are told in no uncertain terms that they are allowed only limited access to the fruits of our society.
With no citation.
Citation? I don't I don't know what he's talking about. I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, I think I think, the case they would make is like, well, you can just look at the disparities in our society, and those disparities must be evidence of discrimination, which I disagree with. But yeah, it's just full of these statements that there's no examples ever given, and you're just if you disagree with it, well, too bad. So,
Hmm.
um,
Oh,
the
that
accuracy of
next
whether
one. Yeah.
whiteness defines a race is largely irrelevant. What is more relevant is that whiteness is associated with unearned privilege, advantages conferred on white Americans, but not on persons of color. It is our contention that much of the denial associated with being white is related to the denial of white privilege. So then you can get into all of the white privilege stuff. Um, and yeah. So the dynamics of whiteness, and yeah, and this is where I just start
Well,
feeling like I'm going kind of crazy because I just
yeah.
disagree with the framing of the entire thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It goes without saying that the racial reality of whites is radically different from that of people of color. Okay. It appears that the most accurate
Again,
assessment of
citing
bias,
himself.
yeah, Sue
Mhm.
2010. It appears that the most accurate assessment of bias comes not from those who enjoy the privilege of power, but from those who are most disempowered. And then he
Yeah.
cites a couple of people, including himself. But and
Yeah.
and that there's something to be talked about there. This is something that's interesting about the statements where you ask a couple of people who are in the target group about the thing, and they can't
Hmm.
really describe it. It's hard for them to describe, or maybe they're offended by the way you've asked the question. Who knows? You're coming at them. You ask somebody else about it who's outside of the target group and you ask them to describe it, they're going to see it differently. Is that across the board? Could we say that of other aspects of life? Could that be described as sort of a mm, I mean, is there some sort of like a standpoint bias that's occurring there? It's an interesting thing to explore. I'd be interested in talking about that. That would have been a cool conversation that could have been sparked by this.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not that none of these things, like, yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, these are important conversations that we should have, but they don't ever get fully explored. They're only ever talked about in this from this one frame. Um, so this is,
I want to hear that first. It is clear that most whites, what is that?
yeah, yeah. First, it is clear that most whites perceive themselves as unbiased individuals who do not harbor racist thoughts and feelings. They see themselves as working towards social justice and possessing a conscious desire to better the life circumstances of those less fortunate than they. I mean, okay, maybe. I don't know that I see myself as working towards social justice, but
It's
definitely
interesting that
I want people to do better, right?
well, it's interesting that you could ever say it's clear that most whites perceive themselves. Like, could I say that about any group? Oh, most
Right.
blacks think of themselves this way. I mean, most Asians think of themselves this. Well, what? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a really that's a
And based on
huge
what?
presumption. Like, how do you know how I think of myself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then he says, although these are admirable qualities, this self-image serves as a major barrier to recognizing and taking responsibility for admitting and dealing with one's own prejudices and biases. To admit to being racist, sexist, or homophobic requires people to recognize that the self-images they hold so dear are based on false notions of the self, and this is his thesis. Um, Being a white person in this society, and yeah, means chronic exposure to ethnocentric monoculturalism as manifested in white supremacy. It is difficult, if not impossible, for anyone to avoid inheriting the racial biases, prejudices, misinformation, deficit portrayals, and stereotypes of their forebears. To believe that one is somehow immune from inheriting such aspects of white supremacy is to be naive or to engage in self-deception. Such a statement is not intended to assail the integrity of whites, but to suggest that they also have been victimized.
What's interesting here is that these are really strong statements of fact. They're saying that this is a fact, and these are not being presented as a theory. This should be presented as a
No.
theory. This is a Coakley Hayes theory of white supremacy. It states that this is how blah blah blah. And then
Hmm.
like any other, like think about your theoretical orientations training where you'd hear about how, this thinker, this is how
Hmm.
Adler would have approached this. This is how, Rogers would have approached this. This is how, you hear about these different theories and they're discussed and their merits are discussed and they're the things that they are good at are discussed and the things that they leave to be desired or the populations that they're not good at working with are discussed. We can dispassionately approach all of these thinkers and their projects in other areas, but here we're asked to drink in as fact this notion of white supremacy and how it's basically like a Lamarckian epigenetics study of white supremacy.
Hmm.
Like you have received this because your people in your ancestry thought this. And it's not even
Yeah.
clear where you're getting this assumption that they thought this. Like, how do you know where my ancestors were from and what political leanings they may have had?
Yeah. I agree with this. And I also just don't even think it's true. Certainly not
Mhm.
anymore.
Mhm.
Being a white person in this society means chronic exposure to ethnocentric monoculturalism. I mean, it's just not true. I mean, if you turn on the TV, like we don't have TV, so
That's
at all.
good.
I don't
That's a
watch
good
commercial
thing.
TV at all.
Yeah.
But I remember being at my in-laws' house a few months ago, and they have, commercial TV, watching the commercials, and just being like bemused how like every single commercial is like the colors of Benetton, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which is fine. Like it's a commercial. I really don't care. But it
Yeah.
certainly, belies the statement that being a
Right.
white person means chronic exposure to ethnocentric monoculturalism. It's just not true. It's just
Right.
not true. Maybe it was at some point in the 1970s and 80s, something like that, perhaps.
Yeah,
But
you
it's
could maybe
certainly
make
not
that
true now.
argument, but yeah. Hmm. It hasn't
Yeah,
been true for quite a long time.
hasn't been. Yeah. So, and then, yeah, he goes here. If white helping professionals are ever to become effective multicultural counselors or therapists, they must free themselves from the cultural conditioning of their past and move towards the development of a non-racist white identity.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So it is, it's, he goes on and on and on and on and on about this
Yeah.
kind of the same
I
stuff.
think it's great to read as
Um,
much of this as you want to. We can take our time with it because it's in his words, and I think that that's where you really see the philosophy that's being outlined here. And I can't stress it enough that this is being taught unchallenged. This is not
yeah,
being presented as one way of seeing this, and there are other ways of seeing this. This is the way that in my program and in many counseling programs, this is being taught to the people who are going to go on and get their counseling
yeah.
license.
And it's taught as truth, and it's
Hmm.
not just taught in this one class, but the
Hmm.
multicultural component is a required component of every single course in the entire graduate program. And
Hmm.
if you're doing a presentation, a multicultural application is required in every single paper, in every single presentation, in every single thing that you do. So it's not just this one class, it's
Right.
it's throughout the
Yeah.
entirety.
It is throughout all of them. And this class in the program that I went to, and I believe this is the case in other ones, this is one of the first classes that a counseling student will take. In the program I was in, you had to take this course within your first 2 quarters of enrollment. And it was because this is where you get that
Hmm.
foundation that lays the groundwork for the way that this is to be talked about in the rest of your program. So every case
Yeah.
conceptualization, every essay that you write, every research paper that you write has to address race in this particular tone.
That's right. Um, this next little part, he says, this is a quotation from a different study from 1985. And like he also does this. I've noticed this where he'll bring in citations from many decades ago as if they're still perfectly relevant today, which they're not. But
Mhm. Mhm.
often it is easier for many whites to identify and acknowledge the different cultures of minorities and accept their own racial identity. The difficulty of accepting such a view is that white culture is omnipresent. It is so interwoven in the fabric of everyday life, of everyday living, that whites cannot step outside and see their beliefs, values, and behaviors as creating a distinct cultural group. And this, I just thinking about this, I just disagreed with this. I mean, I understand the concept of like, it's the water that you swim in and you're not aware of the water that you swim in.
Mhm.
But like, I do, there are distinct cultural groups amongst people who are white, but
Mhm.
I just don't think that there is one distinct white cultural group except for through the framework of oppressors. I mean,
Right.
I think about like, what does, so I grew up in the 90s, right? So like the the Seattle grunge, very white grunge scene of the 1990s in Seattle versus like the rural country Texas like scene from, like, yes, their color of their skin is the same, but they
Mhm.
share almost no cultural references. They would not get along with, I don't know. It's like,
Right.
but
No,
I
that's
just
true.
don't see it.
One thing I'm reminded of here is I know there are studies on like visually distinguishing people of a different ethnicity from oneself. Like the idea that different a white person might have more trouble identifying confusing two different black men or two
Hmm.
different like Asian folks,
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm.
and vice versa.
Vice
The
versa.
black
Hmm.
person might look at two different white men and not be able to tell who's who or whatever. Not that's oversimplifying it, but there's
Sure.
more difficulty discerning the physical characteristics. We they might say all white people look the same, or all blonde
Hmm.
haired people look the same, or we might say
Hmm.
all Chinese people look the same, or something like that.
Hmm.
It's not true, of course, but when you're in within that group, you see tremendous differences. But when you're
Yeah.
outside of that group, it's more difficult to perceive those differences. And so
Sure.
I wish I remembered what studies that would be because I know I've seen these and I find them really interesting. But
Yeah.
this is what he's saying here is representative of his standpoint, looking in and not being able to perceive white people as different from one another.
Yeah. It could totally be that way. Yeah, for sure. Where it's always easier to like perceive the different, the thing that's different from you. Like, and I'm sure this just gets to like visual perception systems, right? Where we see movement from, a context of stillness, or we
Hmm.
see difference. That's what we're designed to see.
Right.
And it could just be also that, I mean, there are, there are more white people, and so there are more, and this gets into questions of culture, right? Cultural groups oftentimes they have common origins.
Hmm.
So if you look at racial groups in the United States, in as much that as they are sharing common origins, they'll share common history and, you know, food and stuff like that. And like you can create an identifiable cultural group. But white people in the United States, some of whom have been here for literally centuries, like family lines, for example, not individuals, of course. Um, and it's too broad of a paintbrush. You can't, there's just not going to be one common white culture. I think that there's an American culture, but I think that's shared across racial groups. So
Hmm.
anyway, I
Well,
just
and it
find
is
this
just very
hard.
interesting to think that like this idea of a white culture being this monolith, this
Hmm.
does not take into account the immigrant from Russia who has just moved here, or
Yeah.
the like you said, the southerner, or the person who's in a rural area versus someone who lives in a big city. This just so many different elements that are being
Yeah.
falsely teamed here.
But yeah, absolutely. But it's worse than that though, because that's not what he's even talking about. He's not even talking about white, about like as truly as a culture. He's
Hmm.
not even talking about what he's talking about white culture, he's talking about prejudice and racism and oppression, that is the thing that characterizes white culture, and that's what we're blind to.
Yeah.
So that he's not even talking about real culture. So, and here's right here, this is exactly what I was saying before. Unintentional behavior is perhaps the most insidious form of racism.
Unintentional racists are unaware of the harmful consequences of their behavior. They may be well-intentioned, and on the surface, their behavior may appear to be responsible because individuals, groups, or institutions that engage in unintentional racism do not wish to harm. It is difficult to get them to see themselves as racist. They are more likely to deny their racism.
Yeah. So it's right. So unintentional behavior is perhaps the most insidious form of racism. That's the worst. Okay. Yeah. And so then here, white counselors and therapists may be unintentional racists. They are unaware of their biases, prejudices, discriminatory behaviors. Um, they they often perceive themselves as moral, good, and decent human beings and find it difficult to see themselves as racist. They do not have a sense of what their whiteness means to them, and their therapeutic approaches to multicultural populations are likely to be more harmful than helpful. Okay? Yeah, these conclusions are often difficult for white helping professionals to accept because of defensiveness and feelings of blame they are likely to engender. Nonetheless, we ask white therapists and students not to be turned off by the message and lessons of this chapter. So, yeah, I'm reading all that and I'm like, and again, like there's no citations for this. This is just his opinion.
Right.
Are more likely to be harmful than helpful.
He's making a really strong claim that, again, in no other place in applied psychology education would you see a claim like that that's not followed by a citation and something that supports that level of certainty.
In our papers, we were not allowed to write a declarative sentence of that sort without it being tied to a citation either.
That's so important, highlighting what you just said. We weren't allowed to talk like this, and we weren't reading stuff like this. This was a real standout. Yeah.
Yep. So he goes into, from this point, models of white racial identity development. So this is the work that needs to be done, right? So this is the thesis that as a white person, you're blind to what white culture is, and he equates white culture with white supremacy. He's very overt about that.
Breaking up a little bit for me there. Let's.
Oh, okay. Let me see.
Yeah, it's kind of breaking up. Maybe I can, if we get it back to working, we can just keep going. If not, we'll just edit this little chunk out.
Okay.
Oh, I hear you again.
Okay, hold on a second.
There you are.
Is it? Okay, because I can't change it over. Should I try to change it over just to something? Okay.
I don't know.
Let me do this real quick.
I'll read a little bit of this while you do that.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see. A number of multicultural experts in the field have begun to emphasize the need for white therapists to deal with their concepts of whiteness and examine their own racism. And he, I don't know who these people are that he's citing here. He's got 1, 2, 3 different papers that he's citing. So a number of multicultural experts that really want white people to deal with the whiteness. Okay.
Yeah. So I went through some of these. He says here, the level of white racial identity awareness is predictive of racism and internal interpersonal characteristics. Hold on. You've frozen up for me.
I'm still here.
Let me see if you're.
Yeah.
Okay, good. There we go. All right. And so I tried to like track down some of these. I tried to track down some of these citations, and it was a grab bag of things, and like a lot of it was behind paywalls. So I'm trying to guess what they're saying based on the abstracts. But a lot of them, I did not. I couldn't even see that it like even those citations were actually giving evidence for that claim statement right there.
Okay, interesting. So I wonder what he's drawing from here.
Yeah, but I mean, this is the point. He's trying to say that like the less aware subjects were of their white identity, the more likely they were to exhibit increased levels of racism. The
Hmm.
higher the level of white identity development, the greater the reported multicultural counseling competence. Again, he gets to define that multicultural counseling competence, right? Which we've talked about.
Hmm. Hmm.
More positive opinions towards minority groups and better therapeutic alliances. Higher levels of mature interpersonal relationships and a better sense of personal well-being were associated with higher levels of white identity consciousness. And as a group, I thought this was funny.
Mm.
Women were more likely than men to exhibit higher levels of white consciousness and were less likely to be racially biased. So
Wow.
the worst group possible is to be a white man. That's the worst. You're the worst.
Right. And this is really interesting because it's, women, this is kind of like there's this weird, they're playing people off of each other because in these classes you hear about, I don't know if you heard about this, but I heard over and over this disparagement of white women's feelings, white women's tears. It's the white
Yeah.
women, white women, white women. But if you can get them to be so you beat them down and then you stroke them a little bit, and then
Yeah.
what are you doing? You're just grooming them to go out and be your big social justice warrior. And that's what we see. We see this represented really like this very activated activist white women. That's who's performing a
Yeah.
lot of this
Yes.
this stuff. And and again
Yeah. Yeah.
it's that little like sideways dig again at men and at white men specifically.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So and I was also reading a little bit about like propaganda techniques and one of the propaganda techniques is to induce a sense of cognitive dissonance, right? Where you get people to be like, oh, well, I have this sense of myself as one way, and then like you force them to confront some like realities that contradict that sense of themselves.
Hmm.
And that creates that sense of cognitive dissonance, which people are, they're motivated to get out of that, to resolve that somehow. And
Yeah.
then they provide this pathway out of your cognitive dissonance. And all you have to do is own your own internal racism and then go become a social justice warrior. And,
Hmm.
there's your salvation. And
Right.
the rest of this chapter is really just along that framework. He
Hmm.
goes through, I don't want to I don't want to go through every white identity model because they're all basically the same.
Yeah.
Um, but they're all basically the same, where the first stage is naivete, and there's different ones where like you just have, as a little kid, you don't really think about race. You just are yourself. You just think people are people.
Hmm.
Um, but
Yeah.
then slowly over time, you become indoctrinated into the oppressive white Euro-American ethnocentrism or whatever it is, into white supremacy. Um, and then and then
So this is
you
interesting there, the naivete stage. Just
hmm
pausing on that
yeah.
a second. A young white child who has almost no personal contact with African Americans, for example, may see a black man in the supermarket and loudly comment on the darkness of his skin. In general, awareness of the meaning of race, racial differences, bias, and prejudice are either absent or minimal. The negative reactions of parents, relatives, friends, and peers toward issues of race, however, begin to convey mixed signals to the child. This is reinforced by the educational system and mass media, which instill racial biases in the child and propel him or her into the acceptance stage. So this is not if the negative reactions of parents, relatives, this is they do. They begin to
Yeah.
convey. So you're as a white child, you start out kind of innocent and you don't see any importance. But then the people around you begin to convey negative reactions towards people of color. So this is a
hmm
really strong assertion also that white people just do this. And
hmm
this is an
Yeah.
area where again this really needs a citation. It does not ring true at all to me.
Yeah.
But if you're going to make a statement like that, you need to have something to back that up. And it's the arrogance of thinking that you know how all people think and act is just it's
Yeah.
not it's anti-scientific, it's anti-psychological.
Yeah. 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 So, but this is this is the ideology.
Okay, so
So
then there's
then,
the
like,
acceptance.
acceptance stage where the kid just sort of like absorbs this and then just believes that that's normal. Um, yeah, white Euro-Americans become the social reference group, and socialization process consistently instills messages of white superiority and minority inferiority into the child.
Consistently
Um,
instills.
yeah. Um, then then the resistance stage. So again, in these different models, it has different names, but basically you're challenged. You have this your understanding of the world, which has been a white supremacist understanding of the world, then becomes challenged. Where again here it's like you become friends with a coworker of color and discover that the images he or she has of these people are untrue. Or you see incidents of unfair discrimination, and then so you sort of become awoke, you become woke, you become awakened to the racial reality.
For
Um,
people who are just listening to this on podcast apps, would you mind reading this paragraph or would you like
yeah,
me to? Yeah.
Yeah, a white person may, for example, make friends with a coworker of color and discover that the images he or she has of these people are untrue. The person may have witnessed clear incidents of unfair discrimination towards persons of color and may now begin to question assumptions regarding racial inferiority. In any case, the racial realities of life in the United States can no longer be denied. The person becomes conscious of being white, is aware that he or she harbors racist attitudes, and begins to see the pervasiveness of oppression in our society. Feelings of anger, pain, hurt, rage, and frustration are present. In many cases, the white person may develop a negative reaction towards his or her own group or culture. Although these at this stage may romanticize people of color, they cannot interact confidently with them because they fear that they will make racist mistakes. So,
And then yeah, I wonder what that Sarah Winter thing is.
yeah,
So I
but
like
then
where he
this is
says
like,
the white person's denial system begins to crumble.
yeah,
This is a
yeah,
stage of your development. This is what happens to you as a white person. Your denial system begins to crumble.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so this is from,
Oh,
this is
this
a
is her
citation from
passage. Okay.
1977. Yeah, we avoid Black people because their presence brings painful questions to mind. Is it okay to talk about watermelons or mention black coffee? Should we use black slang and tell racial jokes? How about talking about our experiences in Harlem or mentioning our black lovers? Should we conceal the fact that our mother still employs a black cleaning lady? We're embarrassedly aware of trying to do our best, but act natural at the same time. No wonder we're more comfortable in all white situations where these dilemmas don't arise.
That was from
Um,
1971,
1977.
1977. How is
Yeah.
that relevant to
Well, this
today?
this this model, like to be fair, this model
Hmm.
was one of the first white racial identity models, and it was developed in the 1980s. Um,
Okay.
so that's fine. But
Okay.
there's like I went through all of the white identity models here, and they all followed the same pattern.
Okay.
So
Hmm.
but yeah, and so then in the redefinition stage, asking a painful question of who you are in relation to one's racial heritage, honestly confronting your biases and prejudices, accepting responsibility for one's whiteness,
Hmm.
accepting responsibility,
Hmm.
right? For one's whiteness are the culminating characteristics. New ways of defining one's social group and one's membership in that group become important.
Hmm.
Um,
I wonder what it means to
so
accept responsibility for the for your physical characteristics.
well,
Like,
it's
have you
it's
accepted
not physical.
responsibility for your brown hair?
I know, but that's not what whiteness is,
Hmm.
Leslie. You
I
haven't you
know.
haven't
Okay.
properly drunk the
I
Kool-Aid.
haven't, I haven't digested it
Whiteness
properly.
means to be a white supremacist
Yeah.
and to harbor racist and oppressive ideas about your people, about other people.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you for re-educating me.
um, yeah. So, and again, these things are like all my life in white neighborhoods, white schools, white jobs, and dealing with white police, to name only a few, I have experienced advantages that are systematically not available to Black people. It does not make sense for me to blame myself for the advantages that have come my way by virtue of my whiteness, but absolving myself from guilt does not imply forgetting about racial injustice or taking it lightly, as my
Hmm.
guilt pushes me to do. And I highlighted these things. It's like maybe back in the 1970s, right? And 1960s, coming off of the civil rights movement, um, But it's as if nothing ever changes. And here we are in 2025, and there's no difference now as there was 50 years ago when we were just barely out of the civil rights era. So this is frustrating to me.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Um,
that next one,
I
it tells you what responsibility actually means here. The internalization stage is the result of
yeah.
forming a new social and personal identity. So your identity has been deconstructed and reconstructed
Hmm.
around this. So your new personal identity involves your race really prominently. And with greater comfort in understanding oneself and the development of a non-racist white identity, come a commitment to social action as well. The individual
Hmm.
accepts responsibility for affecting personal and social change without always relying on persons of color to lead the way. So this
Mhm.
is the
Yeah.
activist mission.
Activist. Yeah. Yeah. So, and that's a really important part of it. It's not enough just to own your own internal racism.
Hmm.
You have to go out and then be a social justice activist. That's a really important part of this. And this is certainly part of the counselor training program
Yeah.
that, I was in, is that that was a necessary component to that proper racial identity.
Hmm.
Um, I, I wanted to, so what's kind of struck me, and so he's going to go through a couple of other identity models. There were a few quotations that I wanted to highlight, if we could, from things that were just kind of shocking to me. Um, so I'm going to see if I can find them uh, here.
Okay.
Hold on a second. My mouse is not working. Oh, it's loading.
Hmm.
Okay, hold on a second. Where he gives examples of like that the way that white people, like when they get to that cognitive dissonance stage where like their sense of themselves as a good person is then challenged by some experience that they have. um let's see if I can find
There's a
where some of these are.
disintegration stage.
Right, yeah, and so these are all different uh things, but there's one. Oh, this one. Okay, I don't so I listen, I don't want to read this out, but I think it's important. So for people that are watching this, I want them to see this,
Hmm.
because I don't want to read it out. I found it really, really offensive.
Wait, which
But
part?
this is, so
The
right down
immersion,
here, this
immersion? Oh, okay.
immersion. So I can read the first part of it.
Okay.
If the person is so this is like when you have like confronted, oh my gosh, reality is not what I thought it was. I thought I was a good person, but actually I'm a racist, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So this is this immersion status in this particular model. This is just another model of white racial identity development. If the person is reinforced to continue a personal exploration of him or herself as a racial being, questions become focused on what it means to be white. Helms states that the person searches for an understanding of the personal meaning of racism and the ways in which one benefits from white privilege. There's an increasing willingness to confront one's own biases, to redefine whiteness, and to become more active in directly combating racism and oppression. The status is different from the previous one in two major ways. It is marked by a shift in focus from trying to change people of color to changing the self and other whites, and an
Hmm.
increasing experiential and affective understanding that was lacking in the previous status. The ability to achieve this affective experiential upheaval leads to a euphoria or even a feeling of rebirth and is a necessary condition to developing a new non-racist white identity.
Hmm.
So
Oh, I see why you don't want
this
to
person,
read it. Yeah,
yeah,
it's got some really coarse language in it, and
yeah. I'll leave this up for a minute so people can put it
just
on
look at
pause
it.
and read it. But like this is what they're saying in order for you to, this is kind of what I mean by like repressed memories or something
Uh-huh.
like this. um
Well,
where
it's saying that all of us white people
all of
have
us
these
have this.
words
Yeah,
inside of us that we're actually
yeah,
thinking, like we're thinking N-word. Like the nicest
yeah,
word I can think of here to read would be Uncle Tom. So we're always thinking these really
yeah,
sexualized and derogatory thoughts about Black people as white people. We always are this is that, yeah, Gabrielle, this is the repressed memory. You have these thoughts inside of
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Hmm.
And it even states explicitly, most whites begin with a good deal of amnesia
Hmm.
Eventually, the memories crowd in, especially when several people pool recollections. Emotional release is a vital part of the process. Experiencing feelings seems to allow further recollections to come. I need persistent encouragement from my companions to continue. That's
Wow.
exactly what this is. And then there's a ton of reinforcement of like, oh, and this is like the struggle sessions, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like you have the breakthrough. Oh my gosh, I finally found the internal racism that I never knew was there. There it is. And then everybody's like, giving you finger snaps or whatever it is that they do to
Right,
like,
right.
yes. And then there's this euphoria. And to me, I was just like, this was so
This is crazy.
abhorrent to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is really to assume that's a process that people need to undergo in order to become good counselors or good people. You
Yeah.
must go
But
through
this
this
is,
like
yeah.
purging of all these
Yeah.
unconscious you have amnesia. You don't know that you think all these bad things, but why don't you go ahead and start saying them in this group of people? Let's all talk about this
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Wow.
And yeah. So in my program, we were encouraged to write a paper like that was exploring our own white racial identity. And yeah, I did not go there. But
Yeah.
like it's also just completely, it's so divorced from my personal experience of being a white person. Like I mean, was raised in Los Angeles. It was in the 90s. There was certainly, I wasn't a completely sheltered person,
Hmm.
but I never talked like this. I never knew anybody that talked like
Hmm.
this. I
Hmm.
never had any of these thoughts in me,
Hmm.
and so
Yeah.
yeah, it's me. I was just like, wow. Um, I, I just don't believe that this is how white people are. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't believe that's how white people are.
And so and once you become a non-racist white person, that you can see that you can explore issues of racism and personal responsibility without defensiveness. So
Hmm.
any questioning or criticism of this ideology constitutes defensiveness. So it's not until you can get
Yeah.
to the point where you accept all of this and you say, yes, that's exactly how it is, that you now have this stamp of approval. You're not harmful to your clients. You're non-racist.
Yeah. After you've accepted your role in perpetuating racism and you've determined to abandon white entitlement. Yeah.
Hmm.
So that's
Hmm.
it. And this model is by far the most widely cited, researched, and applied of all the white racial identity formulations.
Wait,
So that's what he
understanding these
says.
strategic reactions. Wait, understanding these strategic reactions is important for white American identity development, for understanding the barriers that must be overcome in order to move to another status, and for potentially developing effective training or clinical strategies.
Yeah. So this is what you have to do. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay.
So yeah, this was it. And then he goes
It
through,
goes through them again.
this is just the same thing, going through the same thing. He gives a couple of other examples um of like, you know, a group of mothers that have their children playing at a playground, and then like a black child comes in and plays at the playground, and then all the white mothers like make their white kids like leave the playground when the black kid comes on. And again, these things are just so,
Yeah.
I've never
I've
seen
never
that.
seen that
It's,
ever. Not at all.
yeah. Um, right. So this is the white identity development model, and this is
Hmm.
what you have to do in order to become, a good
Non-racist,
person.
anti-racist
Um,
white person.
yeah. So no
Oh.
child is born wanting to be a racist, yet white people do benefit from the dominant subordinate relationship in our society as this factor the white needs to confront in an open and honest manner. So
Hmm.
racism is an integral part of US life, and it permeates all aspects of our culture and institutions. This is, yeah,
Yeah,
so
we're
this
breaking
is
up a little
it's
bit
a
again.
seven-step process.
Let's see.
Okay.
Yeah, racism is an integral
Okay.
part of US life and it permeates all aspects of our culture and institutions. Ethnocentric monoculturalism.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still
Um,
breaking up a little bit.
okay. Let
Oh,
me,
now you're clear again.
is it
Gotta
clear
love
again?
that. Yeah, it's
Okay.
clear. That's the The
Okay.
joys of technology. It's so good and so
Yeah.
frustrating sometimes.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah.
No, it's okay.
So this is Sue's seven, and it's the same. It's the 7-step process, and we could go.
Look at that last one you've
It's
highlighted
exactly
there.
the same thing.
That last one there you
Mm.
highlighted, the most desirable
Yeah.
outcome, according to who? Sue,
Right.
is
Sue.
one in
Hmm.
which the white person not only accepts his or her whiteness, but also defines it in a non-racist and anti-racist manner, which is what he's telling you here.
Yeah, and the difference between non-racist and anti-racist, of course, is that the anti-racist requires you to go out and do stuff to tear down the system and all of these other things. Um,
Mhm. I
uh,
like this where it says between the ages of 3 and 5, the young white child begins to associate positive ethnocentric meanings to his or her own group and negative ones to others. The child is bombarded by misinformation through the educational channels, mass media, and significant others in his or her life, and a sense of the superiority of whiteness and the inferiority of all other groups and their heritage is instilled. When and where? When and where
how?
is
Yeah,
he saying this?
yeah.
This is
I,
this is uh
yeah,
this is being spoken as a fact of current modern
yeah,
life.
yeah. And this is Sue's particular, like this is his thing. Yeah. And I'm just like, I just don't see it. Where? I mean, where?
Yeah.
I don't see where that's like it is in fact it is the opposite now. It is much
Mhm.
more the opposite where in schools children are being taught that, being white means to be racist and all of this stuff. So
Right,
it's
right.
it's just not true. It's just not true. But it doesn't give any
No,
citations. So
no. I'd like to see the
yeah,
study. I mean, where's the data on this? Where's the like we've surveyed these the output from these media companies. We see these messages. This would be an easy thing to do. I mean, not easy, but it's a doable thing. And
yeah.
I believe that you would, as you say, see the opposite, but there's no citation here. It's just a statement of truth here.
Right. Yeah. And it goes contrary to everything. I mean, children's TV programming is again like all the colors of the rainbow and
Hmm.
it's I there's no parents that
It
are
has been
teaching
for a
their
long time.
has been for a long time, and the
Yeah.
schools are the education channels. What in the world? What are they talking about? It's
It
just
just
not
sounds
true.
like he's kind of making this up between the ages of 3 and 5. Like when you say something like that, you're talking about specific
Yeah.
discoverable information that you should
Right.
have some kind of it's just
He's
this is
stating it as
yeah,
if it's some yeah, as if it's
as
some evidence measurable thing that he
hmm
has some data for to support it, but it isn't. Yeah.
hmm
Oh yeah, here's the example of yeah, the one of the yeah.
about little kids on a playground
But
or a
yeah,
McDonald's.
one of the white
Yeah.
girls from the group approached the black boy and they started a conversation. During that instant, the mother of the girl exchanged quick glances with the other mothers who nodded knowingly. She quickly rose from the table, walked over to the two, spoke to her daughter, and gently pulled her away to join her previous playmates. Within minutes, however, the girl again approached the black boy and both began to play with the truck. At that point, all the mothers rose from the table and loudly exclaimed to their children, "It's time to go now."
So
This is from Sue's own
it's
work.
from him, his own story. So could you go
Yeah,
up a little bit and
yeah.
what is the beginning of that thing? Oh, that's the following passage describes one of the insidious processes of
The process of
socialization.
socialization.
So, and
Yeah,
then it goes on to just write this little story he's the one that cited for this story.
yeah,
And it doesn't
yeah.
have any, like, did this actually happen? Is this just a story that he made up? He's not even telling us that. And he's citing himself.
Mm-mm.
This
Mm-hmm.
is like an example of, oh my gosh, this is another example
This,
where I think he just makes up his own stuff.
yeah, and it would have been never acceptable in our research and methods classes or any paper that we wrote in our graduate program. So, uh,
Okay, let's see.
yeah,
The conformity phase. The white person possesses limited accurate knowledge of other ethnic groups, but he or she is likely to rely on social stereotypes as the main source of information. Consciously or unconsciously, the white person believes that white culture is the most highly developed and that all others are primitive or inferior. That's interesting because he just went into how white people don't realize that they have a culture. So which is it? Do they think their culture is
Which is
superior,
it?
or do they not know that they have a culture?
Yeah. It's also like, I mean, when I read this part, I was like, it's also the case though, here in the United States and in the Western world in general, that immigration is only going one way. We have immigration from other cultures to our culture, right?
Mhm.
So it's not that he doesn't have a point there. Like it's possible that we do get the sense that, well, America is great because everybody wants to come to America. Um, and so it's not that I don't know that I get the sense that other cultures are inferior or something like that. But but also but also if we're that bad, if his contention throughout this chapter is that white culture is white supremacy. It is oppression. It is feeling that you are superior to other people. It is racism and discrimination. That is
Mhm.
white culture, according to Sue. And so if we're that terrible, it is a little strange that people all over the world desperately want to come to
Yeah.
America. I don't
Yeah.
know. Just putting it out
No,
there.
that's
Just
that's
put it
true.
out there.
That's true.
Um,
But to call it just
so, but
white is also another, that's another like association that needs to be backed up by something.
yeah. Um, but it doesn't. Yeah. Many whites deny that they belong to a race that allows them to avoid personal responsibility for perpetuating a racist system. Um,
Like a
yeah.
fish in water, whites either have difficulty seeing or are unable to see the invisible veil of cultural assumptions, biases, and prejudices that guide their perceptions and actions. So this is
Yeah.
another assertion of the he knows what's in the mind of all white people.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. And
And then it
it,
says
it,
that they believe the differences are unimportant and that people are people. We are all the same under the skin. We should treat everyone the same. Problems wouldn't exist if minorities would only assimilate. So that's kind of a strange one, isn't that? Like he does that several times. I've seen that where he'll make a couple of statements that are like these magnanimous statements, and then he will
yeah.
pair them with something that's like, wait, that's kind of
As
jarring.
if they're the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah, as
Yeah,
if it's
as
the
if they're
same.
exactly the same. Yeah. So this is again, it's like very similar to the other models. And then here's like this dissonance phase, where, yeah, for example, a person who may consciously believe that all people are created equal and he or she treats everyone the same suddenly experiences reservation as about having African Americans move next door or having one's son or daughter involved in an interracial relationship. So and then he brings in additionally some major event, e.g., the assassination of Martin Luther King, may force a person to realize that racism is alive and well in the United States. That was in 1968.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's now been almost 60 years, and he's giving this as an example of like the what might wake people up to the racial reality. Like,
Yeah.
okay, I could see that have been something that would have woken people up to the racial reality of things in the United States in the 1960s, but
Mhm.
in 2025, yeah.
Yeah.
So, increasing realization that one is biased and that Euro-American society does play a part in oppressing minority groups. That's an unpleasant realization. But
Mhm.
again, he still doesn't give any evidence. Like, in what way does our society oppress minority groups? No evidence is ever given.
Yeah,
It's just the
he doesn't
statement of
list that.
fact.
We should hear about that. That would be important here. If
Yeah.
that's the
And it
thing
doesn't.
that's wrong and it doesn't go into it. Yeah.
Never, no, doesn't. Yeah.
Oh,
Um,
wow. I love that. Like, as these conflicts ensue, the white person may retreat into the protective confines of white culture
yeah.
or move progressively toward insight and revelation, which is like the two
See,
paths. Which
the
way, white
choice point.
man?
I know, right? Either you're
Yeah.
going to just go back and yeah, and then of course it's very clear what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to go and you're supposed
Hmm.
to, expunge the racism from your from your soul.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So
What's this one here?
guilt and
This,
shame.
yeah.
Challenging the prevailing beliefs of the times may mean risking ostracism from white relatives, friends, neighbors, and colleagues. Regardless of the choice, there are many uncomfortable feelings of guilt, shame, anger, and depression related to the realization of inconsistencies in one's belief systems. Guilt and shame are most likely related to the recognition of the white person's role in perpetuating racism in the past. Guilt may also result from the person's being afraid to speak out on the issue or to take responsibility for his or her part in a current situation. For example, the person may witness an act of racism, hear a racist comment, or be given preferential treatment over a minority person, but decide not to say anything for fear of violating racist white norms. I mean, I just look at my experience and I'm like, I don't see it. And maybe I'm just around really nice people. I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't see
Yeah.
acts of racism. No, people don't make racist comments. I don't hear
Well,
people making
it's
racist
just,
comments.
it sets up this thing. It's very much like that. What's the logical fallacy that's being employed when they do the when did you stop beating your wife thing?
Yeah, that's
I mean,
exactly it.
it's,
Yeah.
yeah. It sets you up
So,
to have to do some kind of inventory and go, wait, does that? And then you find yourself like line by line taking it seriously when really it's the framing of the entire thing that's really problematic.
and it definitely like creates a paranoia. I don't know if you remember this, but like I do remember being in the class, and my class didn't have just white people in it.
Mhm.
It had some people of other races, and talk about self-censorship and like being paranoid to say anything and just being like, I'm just not. So we did
Well,
not have
yeah.
deep conversations in this class at
No.
all.
Yeah, we didn't
We
either.
didn't talk about it at
No,
all.
this that's
Yeah.
absolutely right. Like you're being told if you have any objections to this, it's because you're at a more undeveloped stage and
Yeah.
you're really insidiously deeply racist and you really think these things. And so
Yeah.
that's a way to pre-punish you for anything that you might say and to really curtail questioning any of
I'd
this.
love to hear like what your if we have time, I'd love to hear just like this gets to what you were talking about, like when you did actually
Yeah.
try to make any
Yeah.
objection at all to this stuff. What
I'm
happened to
happy
you
to
in your
share that.
class?
Whenever you feel like we want to kind of get towards the end, it'll probably take about, I'd say, 10 minutes or so to go through those
Yeah.
those two essays.
I don't think there's nothing new about this. This is just his model. It's the same thing, right? The introspective phase where you're looking, what does it mean to be white? Who am I in relation to my whiteness? And then integrative phase, understanding yourself as a racial, cultural being, being aware of the social, political influences regarding racism, appreciating, yeah, this is just like how you become a good person. And then commitment to anti-racist action phase.
Hmm.
This is there we go. Um, let's see if it's going to scroll up. Hold on. Yeah, and this is where like it's not enough just to find it in yourself. You need to go out and be an active anti-racist. Um, and like this is I highlighted this was the only like direct stuff. Like I was left wondering, what are we supposed to do? Okay, so if I can't look inside of me and find this horrible racist stuff because it's not there, then what am I supposed to do? What is the substance of what I'm supposed to do to be an anti-racist? And this is the best that it gets. You're supposed to object to racist jokes. Educate family, friends, neighbors, and coworkers about racial issues. And take direct action to eradicate racism in the schools and workplace and in social policy. Um,
Often in direct
are
conflict
examples
with other whites.
other whites. I just, again, it's like, okay, I don't hear racist jokes. Nobody says them around me. I don't know. Educate family, friends, and neighbors and coworkers about racial issues. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
uh, uh, and then direct action to eradicate racism in the schools. But he doesn't never gives any examples of what this
What that
racism
would look like.
is. Like,
Yeah.
what is it? What does that look like? There's never any examples about this. Um, So it's just
Movement.
these
Yeah.
generalities.
This thing here, movement into this phase can be a lonely journey for whites because they are oftentimes isolated by family, friends, and colleagues who do not understand their changed worldview. Strong pressures in society to not rock the boat, threats by family members that they will be disowned, avoidance by colleagues, threats of being labeled a troublemaker or not being promoted at work are all possible pressures for the white person to move back to an earlier phase of development. To maintain a non-racist identity requires whites to become increasingly immunized to social pressures for conformance and begin forming alliances with persons of color or other liberated whites to become a second family to them. As can be seen, the struggle against individual, institutional, and societal racism is a monumental task in this society. Now, if that doesn't sound like a really radical action plan, this is a like that's the word. This is to radicalize somebody. And this is
Yeah.
what you as a counselor are supposed to do is to tear down all the bonds around you and ignore the objections of anybody to your new way of speaking and thinking and
Hmm.
break the bonds of your family, isolate yourself from your family and form a second family with persons of color and liberated whites. This is
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
action plan as a counselor.
Yeah. And this is what you're being taught. And that if you don't do this, then you're causing harm to people.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's very radical, and it's very, left wing,
Hmm.
like breaking down boundaries
Breaking
and whatever.
families. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's kind of
So,
setting you up against your family already. Like this is saying threats by family members that they will be disowned and threats
yeah.
of being labeled a troublemaker or not promoted. It's sowing seeds of conflict in your relationships, isolated by family, friends, and colleagues. He's basically saying your family and friends, you can't trust them. You can't trust them.
Hmm.
They pose a threat to you. They will abandon you. They don't care about you enough to embrace you with your new worldview. This is cult stuff here.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah. And that's what
Hmm.
you're supposed to develop in yourself as a white counselor. And that's also what you're supposed to be guiding your clients towards as well, because
Hmm.
this is a theory of
Hmm.
men. I don't know. It's a theory of like what I don't even know what it would be like actualization, right? As a human
Right, right,
being, human
right.
actualization.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. That's the white identity development model, and this is what we're being indoctrinated into. And if you don't buy it, then it's just evidence of your own irredeemability as a human.
I would really like
So,
people listening and watching this to understand that this is not one way. This is not some supplemental reading that some radical teacher has some of the counseling students read. This is a textbook that I think I paid, what, upwards of $200 for, a required book in one of the foundational courses in my counseling program. This stuff that we just read is foundational in today's American counseling training. This
yeah,
isn't this isn't uh, anything you could say about this. It's not hyperbolic. This is actually we most of what we've just done here is to read the work there. I mean, we editorialized as well, but most of that is just an examination of the actual words written and taught to your counselors
yeah,
in a
yeah.
required
So,
course. KCREP requires it.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So
So,
just
yeah.
be warned. Be diligent in seeking out counselors for. I mean, like the fact is, like most of this isn't really going to come up in the actual counseling. Like what we do as counselors. I'm going to stop sharing here. Because I do want to hear just what it was like because like I didn't like this stuff. I tried to just stay quiet in my class. I really did.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't know if I should have or not because I find it very, very toxic just for all the reasons we just described. But I was just like, I just got to get through this. I tried to, ask some questions as I could, but mostly just
Hmm.
kept quiet.
Hmm.
But you didn't. You actually tried to push back a little bit.
I
and it didn't
did.
go well.
Yeah, it didn't go well. So I pulled up two essays. I haven't read, I skimmed these earlier today. It's kind of cringe for me to look and see how much I was trying to be conciliatory towards this stuff. I was trying to take it somewhat seriously. I also am speaking the language a little bit. So it's hard for me to go back and look at this, but that kind of speaks to the acculturation you were talking about before we started recording. Like there's a lot, even if you're trying to resist this, that you end up drinking in. So let's just go into them and I'll cringe along with you guys if I'm being a little bit too woke in my stuff here. Let's see. I think it's the not that one. It is this one. What are you seeing right now? This does it say Multicultural Perspectives
Well,
Journal entry week 4? Okay.
yeah.
So these are short, they're double spaced, a couple pages. So I'll just read this really quickly for you guys. In thinking of my reaction to reading Sue's book, Counseling the Culturally Diverse, there are aspects with which I agree and those with which I do not agree. But I'm realizing one of the things that makes me most uncomfortable is his zoo approach, because he's kind of doing this like taxonomy of people, as we briefly
Mhm.
discussed in class. He does a good deal of generalizing when it comes to the characteristics and experiences of individuals from different backgrounds. I find this uncomfortable to read at times, both when his focuses on white people, or generalizations focus on white people, and when they focus on people from diverse backgrounds, because that's how we were supposed to talk about them, people from diverse
Mm.
backgrounds. And I feel that he undervalues individual differences in lived experience. Sue mentions numerous times during the text that persons from Asian cultures are more collectivist in orientation. And I wonder whether, as a self identified Asian American person, he has examined the extent to which he may have internalized this attitude. Perhaps his worldview is biased by this, and it contributes to his tendency to identify people by group and engage in stereotyping. For instance, he continually addresses the reasons why white people may have a problem with his work. He mentions denial of or ignorance due to lack of exposure to non-white populations of the existence of racism, and he talks about defensiveness because of wanting to maintain a pro-social self-image, which is not compatible with internalized racism. What he never addresses, however, is that his generalizations may simply not resonate with the lived experiences of some of the people he's discussing. I can tell you that my experience as a white person does not include denial of racism or protection from racial tension. I've been aware of racism since an early age, as the culture in which I was raised was one in which race was a salient concept. Racial oppression by European colonialists was a topic with which I was familiar from an early age. In South Texas, much of our social studies education in school centered on the battles for the very land we stood on and the knowledge of the forces on all sides. Texas joining the Union felt recent, and the awareness that white people did not belong on this land was clear. My learning was not only academic, but personal as well. I was exposed to plenty of racial tension, and as I have discussed previously, the bullying to which I was subjected was chronic and severe, including social ostracism, physical beatings, etc. And if I search myself, I may find some remnants of resentment for certain people, but we were all kids, and though there was a lot of cruelty and hurt, I do not blame anyone for what I went through. There were social forces larger than all of us at play, and with time and wisdom comes understanding. I think the way Sue generalizes the white experience and white attitudes towards race is damaging and alienating, and not in the, quote, good, uncomfortable way that promotes growth. The tone of this course so far has also been damaging and alienating, at least to me. I've done so much work over the years to heal from my experiences and to understand the larger picture. I knew that it would be difficult for me to call up memories of painful and formative experiences, and I reached out to the instructor at the outset of the class to ask for connection, help, and guidance as I approached this. I'll go into that in a minute. Although we have spent quite a bit of time talking about the damage we can cause as therapists if we invalidate or dismiss the lived experiences of our clients, this is exactly how my story was received by my instructor. And we are repeatedly told in class that white women's feelings are unimportant. I was told to talk about my experiences in class and attempted to, but the response was that being a bullying victim may make me a less effective therapist and that I should reparent myself. The tone deafness and cruelty of this response after my heartfelt attempt at outreach, along with the clear bias of the class, has left me feeling horrible and has bled into my personal life and my performance in other classes. I'm afraid to speak up in class after this, and afraid that my instructor has such a bias against me that my evaluations will be impacted. I want to have a mature and elevated discussion about multiculturalism and the different features of identity that impact each of us, and how, as counselors, we can be sensitive and prepared to work with diverse populations. I think this is an important discussion, and I would like to see it handled in a way that does not attack and dismiss individual experiences that are not in line with stereotypical narratives, and truly allows for the myriad ways facets of our identities can intersect. I do not want to dominate this discussion or even to share my experiences necessarily, as it makes me very anxious to reveal personal stories to people I don't know well. In fact, I very much resent that I was pushed to do so after saying I didn't want to, and then publicly admonished in response. But I do not think it is funny to make white people out to be clueless, quote, Beckies, whose feelings do not matter and who are monolithic in their ignorance and denial. If we are to approach the issue fairly and from an unbiased perspective, we should take a more mature and academic tone and conduct serious discussions of the issues. So that's my essay to her. This is week 4. And so this would be my 4th journal to her at this point. And I'm being really direct about my criticisms of the book. I'm using some of the woke language here. This message that I sent her, I reached out in the beginning. I was like, I'm really kind of concerned that this class is going to be a bunch of stereotypes. And I hope that it does a good job of really highlighting that individuals really do have unique experiences and doesn't just paint everybody with one brush. And I said, well, and I don't want to play into this idea that we can all be victims. So I don't really want to share my own story as if you're supposed to feel sorry for me along with the other people you're supposed to feel sorry for. I'm just going to tell you that I'm going into that sort of defensiveness, that
Yeah,
line by
yeah,
line
yeah.
critique, like, but I didn't do that. That wasn't my experience. And that's not how I want to approach this. So that was kind of the nature of that first letter that I wrote to her. And she said, well, this
Yeah.
could be really valuable for you to share with the other students in class. I encourage you to share this. And so I was like, oh, okay.
Mm,
I'm going to try to take that at face value and hear that if I initiate this conversation, this professor will actually be supportive in creating a space with more nuance around these issues. And so the very next class I did, and that's where she told me that I needed to reparent myself and
uh,
examine my white privilege if I was not going to harm my future clients. So that's what I'm referencing there.
she totally set you up.
She
That's
set me up.
awful.
She set me up. So here's what she
Yeah.
says back. This is her response. Leslie, I am concerned about your responses to this class, but not for the reasons you've described here. I see your emotional reactions to the terms, the texts, and I am using to generalize the majority of white Americans' experiences as personally offensive because they do not resonate for you and have placed expectations on me as the instructor to modify the course or spend extra time to cater to your unique experience of having experienced racialized oppression as a white person. I am concerned that there's no response I can give that would be adequate enough to resolve this discomfort for you because my efforts to use inclusive language and stress the need for intersectionality and nuance does not appear to resonate for you. I think I'm representing something unexamined and painful for you at this time. I encourage you to consider speaking with your classmates about your experience of the class and or reach out to the course liaison to discuss how this class is affecting you. And then she gave me intermediate
Oh,
competency, which is that's the highest thing that you could award. So it's not a,
yeah.
so that's her response
Wow.
to that letter
Oh,
is to say
so
that
you were definitely
this is important
not
here.
seen and heard in that.
Not at
Yep,
all.
yep,
This is important.
yep,
Not for the reasons you have described here. I don't hear what you're saying, but I see something else in you that really
yeah,
concerns me. And I think I'm representing something unexamined and painful for you at this time. So basically, she's mind reading and she's saying, I'm concerned about you, but not about what you're actually saying. It's something else that I see in you that you don't see. And I think that there's something psychological that you can't see that's going on between
yeah,
you and me. So this is a real, like, this is complete manipulation and abuse of authority.
yeah. I can imagine just like, what like, first of all, just the courage it must have taken for you even to push back in this way. Um, and then to have that response be given just like that. I mean, first of all, to do what you did and actually share in class what your experiences were, being told that it would be a valuable thing for the class to be able to discuss, doing so, receiving, I can just imagine what that was like. I would have it would have been so difficult to be faced with this whole classroom full of people judging you based on your experience that they weren't there for.
Yeah.
And like this is exactly, and I mean, it's this is exactly what we're supposed to not be doing as counselors. Like we're supposed to be looking at an individual and meeting them where they are and not telling them that they're wrong because they don't fit the model that you've been told you're supposed to be fitting into.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, this would be a great example of just what you're actually not supposed to do as a counselor, which is like, well, sorry, you're not perceiving this correctly. And
Hmm.
so there's nothing I can say, right? She's like, there's nothing I can say adequate enough to resolve this discomfort for you.
Hmm.
Um,
One of the
yeah,
things
that
that
must
you
have
can
been.
start to see here too is the way that is she's implying that there's something psychologically wrong with me, something
Hmm.
mentally unwell about me. And this was an interesting, this was one of the things that really disturbed me about the course and the way that this is what caused me to raise a grievance against this professor once this course was concluded, is there I don't know about your counseling program, but in mine, during our orientation and during all of there were several different orientations. So we had this big welcome, and then we had these group, like cohort orientations. And every
Hmm.
one of them, and our family of origin class was our first class that we took. And all of these intro discussions about this program very much referred to it as like it's going to be like 3 years of intensive therapy. This is going to be like going through your own therapy. We encourage you to have a therapist as you go through this, but also the way that we're putting you through this counseling program, you're going to have to reach deep inside. This is this
Hmm.
big therapeutic experience where you're doing a lot of sharing, and coming through this is going to be like you went through so much intensive therapy. So there's always these comparisons made to our work here and and being a therapy client. And what
Yeah.
this professor starts to do is first of all, she's kind of using like therapy-esque language here. Like she's got this authority, this therapeutic authority, this psychological authority to say that she can see something wrong with me that I can't see. But then she also is
Yeah.
saying, like, I think I'm representing something unexamined and painful for you. So she's kind of like softly diagnosing me here. And what she
Hmm.
continues to do throughout the course and at the end of the course was she's accusing me of using her as a therapist and saying that I am seeking something from her that she can't give as my teacher. So she's playing this
Mm.
really weird manipulation, and you'll see it in this next journal if you want to see the next one. I think this next one's more brief than this one. This
Okay.
is week 8. So now we jump uh over to um this this is 4 weeks later. This is the end of the quarter. I think there were 9 weeks in the quarter. I'm not going to say that the professor's name out loud, but it could. And so I skip over the places. In that last one too, I skip over places where anybody's name is mentioned because I'm not trying to out anybody in
Yeah.
particular. But
Yeah.
this is just to read the essay and the responses here. To preface this, this is my journal after the day where during a discussion in class, the teacher cried and told me that she had not been able to provide a safe place for a safe space for people to share, and that's why our course wasn't deeper and more nuanced than it could have been, and that she had used
Hmm.
her own. She actually used the phrase, "I this was my own emotional labor that I put into this course," and that so this is this day. I sent this in, so you're probably seeing two of my most direct reflections to her.
Yeah.
So I start this out here. I found this week's readings to be an interesting departure from Sue's works on specific racial groups. I particularly enjoyed the chapters on older adults and women and thought that his implications for clinical practice with older adults, including assuming competence and not cognitive deficits when communication issues arise, were important. I thought it was interesting also that in the chapter on Sue in the chapter on, okay, Sue acknowledges that white people make up over 40% of Americans in poverty. Yet he does not apply this caveat when discussing white culture in general, and in my opinion, conflates the experience of whiteness at large with the white middle class experience. This hits close to home for me, as I fail to see my experiences reflected in his broad stroke take on the white perspective. And off to the side, the teacher says, "This is a fair criticism. You might be interested in this article that addresses the lack of class discussion and counseling." And she gives me an article, so that's nice. As I said in class, I also found it interesting to hear several classmates discuss their feelings of, quote, white fragility when confronting their, quote, whiteness, as it impacts and shapes their reality and the reality of those around them. I've not had this experience because I have always been aware of myself as a white person, for better and for worse, and I'm not processing these concepts as an adult with a fully formed persona that must be disassembled and reconstructed with this new awareness in mind. Hearing from those with whom these concepts resonate expands my consciousness and illustrates for me the value of these discussions, despite my objection to the generalizations they so often support. So, see, I'm really trying to
Yeah.
be open to this.
Yeah.
I enjoyed my small group discussion with my classmate today as well. We talked about his experiences growing up as an Iranian kid in a white neighborhood and how he frequently felt left out and different from others. I had similar experiences of ostracism as a child and teenager, and we both felt that we had been hurt by these experiences, but that they also helped us to find certain values that we might not have found without them. For instance, we discussed the value of connection to others and the value of acceptance. These values help us both to be more compassionate and inclusive to others. My classmate also brought up that he was disappointed by the lack of depth in the class discussions, and I agreed that I felt similarly, but said that I was hesitant to discuss it in class. Several other classmates have sent out group emails about this, as there was general frustration with the class and disappointment that we did not have an opportunity to give our feedback at mid-quarter. We weren't given any chance to give any feedback on this class, unlike every other class in this program.
Mm.
I felt the same way and decided I could try to broach the topic delicately, so I decided to offer my thoughts on it in support of my classmate after he spoke. I felt that the instructor response was to be defensive, and I was also surprised by the lack of support from classmates, some of whom have been very vocal outside of class and have even contacted the course liaison over frustrations. I have not done so because I think it's important to be more direct in communicating with the instructor rather than going above her. Though I am upset that I spent so much money and time on a course that mostly involved reading a book I could have read on my own, listening to personal anecdotes from the instructor, and watching funny videos about white people being clueless. Though I was approached by 5 or 6 classmates afterward to thank me for speaking up, no one really spoke up in class to validate my criticisms. I waited till I got to my car to cry. Actually, I thought I cried in the bathroom, but maybe that was a different day. It was a humiliating experience of being left alone like that. It was a humiliating experience being left alone like that. I can honestly say that I regret taking this course. This is compounded by the fact that I have friends in another section of this course this quarter who are having really meaningful discussions of important topics and feel that they have grown a great deal in their understanding of multicultural perspectives. The value I have received from this course has been far less than I hoped from a graduate level course that costs as much as this does, and I strongly feel that this should have been a 1-credit hybrid course if the instructor intentionally limited student interaction, as she stated today. So I'll just I'll say what her responses were to these things. When I decided to offer my thoughts, that part of this statement, she says, "I was trying to understand your expectations from the course, and my experience of our exchange again seems to be different from yours." Okay. So I said here, though I am upset that I spent so much money and time on a course that mostly involved reading a book I could have read on my own, listening to personal anecdotes from the instructor, and watching funny videos about white people being clueless. Her response to that was to say, "This is a flippant and exaggerated description of the course content and my clinical expertise, and the focus on the cost communicates to me a customer transaction expectation rather than a learning experience preparing you for difficult clinical work. I have ignored these abrasive remarks up to this point, as some anger is a normal reaction in this course. But as they continue into the end of the quarter, I need to address this issue and advise you to use more professional language in the future." So I said something back to her. Is this too deep? Is this okay to keep going with this? I hope it's all right, Gabrielle. I'm not taking too
Yeah,
much.
I mean, this is the frustration because, like, this is like, do you say anything or not?
Yeah.
And then you try to say something, and this is what you get. And so
Hmm.
the only option is just to like shut up and take it, like, the good little girl you're supposed to be,
Hmm.
or not. And if you don't, then you quickly are, it's quickly very clear that you're actually not allowed to have your own personal opinion about this if it deviates from the standard line.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. So I'll if this is, for like the three people who are holding on and continuing to watch this long examination, I'll go ahead and read this. This is my response to her telling me that I need to use more professional language and that she's calling me out. I said,
Yeah.
I feel that a graduate level psychology course in which the professor says that white people are, quote, nothing special, Becky's, and that, quote, white women's feelings are less important, without qualifying these statements with clarity and very careful analysis, is seriously lacking in credibility. The videos and examples we have viewed and heard in class are often snarky, comical, and contradictory, and have served to shut down discourse by setting a tone that is mocking and unwelcoming of personal exploration. In terms of professionalism, this has been my main complaint about the way this course has been conducted. I am not one for public speaking, and when I found myself on the spot last week, I began rambling about class participation. But really, I have larger complaints. I have consulted with others about this class, including fellow students, therapists, and my faculty advisor, and I feel the way that this material has been presented is sophomoric and far beneath the level of complex analysis I expected from the course. I have not contacted the course liaison yet, as I prefer to communicate directly with you, but please do not accuse me of using unprofessional language. You have used the F word several times in class, and just last class, sexually objectified a male show host in what I felt was a gross display of sexism and unprofessional behavior. Not at all the way I would expect a professor would act when charged with helping us to become aware of and overcome culture, and this includes gender bias. In fact, I would posit that this course does not seek to elucidate our unconscious biases for the purposes of striving to provide or less biased therapy, but rather seeks to replace biases against marginalized populations with biases against majority populations. I think this is
Absolutely.
entirely unprofessional and anti-intellectual in the deepest sense. Additionally, the fact that you think the cost shows a transactional approach may be revelatory of your own economic position. For some of us, going to graduate school is a sacrifice, and for others, it is a huge sacrifice. The cost is very significant for me and my family, and I feel every bit of it. So
Yeah.
that's my response.
I hope it felt good to just really directly state some of those things because
Hmm.
yeah, I bet this was like maybe one of the first times she'd ever been really challenged in this way. And been called out, right? She felt not she was felt very, free to call you out on. I don't even know what unprofessional language she was even talking about. I really don't.
Yeah,
But
I don't either because I really tried to frame these things, even if directly, in an as academic a tone as I could possibly use.
yeah,
So, um,
yeah. It sounds
uh,
awful. I mean, I
yeah.
still think I still think you give the more credit than probably is warranted to like what the course could have actually been because of the textbook itself and the way that uh, yeah, if you're gonna have the class that's centered around the textbook, you're just never gonna get into any complex issues of culture at all. Like
Hmm.
I don't even remember there even being like, was there ever even a chapter that even discussed what culture is? Like
Hmm.
super interesting things. And it was never the only aspects of culture were just addressed at a very superficial level,
Yeah. Yeah. Just
stereotypes and
demographics,
whatnot.
really.
Yeah. So
So to not belabor this too much more, I'll just there's more like little side comments that she made and I responded to, but I'll conclude by just reading her response to that paper, that little essay, and you can
yeah.
see what she said back. So she gave me required competency. I actually didn't remember that I got only required in one of these. The way that their
Mm-hmm.
grading system was set up, that was like the minimum that you could get. And so
Mm-hmm.
this is what I ended up getting for the whole course was required, the
Uh,
minimum grade. Yeah.
yeah.
So throughout this course, I have advised you on how to manage these strong emotional reactions to the course, including seeking personal counseling, discussing your experience with classmates, discussing your experience with the course liaison, as well as giving you extensive feedback on your journals to support your self-reflection and challenge your assumptions that I believe might become barriers to meaningful clinical work in the future. I have to wonder what parts of our identities are interacting that have created such a strong barrier to your learning this quarter. I expect this lies in your, I just want to highlight that for anybody, just
Yeah.
underscore that. I expect this lies in your expectation of the course, which you have expressed not having been met, but I have not described in a way that I can conceptualize. My best guess is that you expected more time to express your perspectives and learn about the cultural histories and perspectives of your classmates, but were met with mostly lecture delivered material. What is it like for you to be disappointed in your experience and not see yourself accurately represented throughout the course and not be able to express yourself as often and completely as you had hoped? Can you use this experience to empathize with the
Oh my
experiences
gosh.
of others who have been disappointed or felt misled by institutions or authorities they have relied on? I expect to see more respectful language regarding myself and the course material in your final paper, and more self-reflective material rather than your criticisms of the course delivery. This is an important part of your clinical training for you to communicate using a professional demeanor, even around emotionally charged or controversial topics. I recommend you utilize the Writing Center for assistance if this feedback is unclear.
Wow. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that learning that you were supposed to do didn't happen because you didn't just swallow the Kool-Aid and adopt wholesale the worldview that they expect you to fall into line
Yeah.
to do so. And since you didn't do that, that was your fault. And that is um yeah, and that there's something psychologically wrong with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the very clear message left. Wow.
It was,
I don't blame you
yeah.
for leaving the program.
Well, I stayed in for another 2 years. That was just the very beginning of the program for me. And it was
Yeah.
I yeah, it was like to write in and try over and over to be as clear as I could about what were my concerns and try to be conciliatory towards aspects of the intention of the material. Um and really just try to say it and then to be met with, I wonder what's really going on for you because I suspect it might be this or this or this, but it couldn't
Because
be
she
what you're
she
actually
couldn't
saying.
actually listen to what you were saying, and it couldn't have been actually the problem that you laid out very clearly. That clearly wasn't it. That
Yeah.
couldn't have been it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
yeah, well, it's an example again of just like that disconnect, and where I just feel like there's not a common frame of reference, and there's no openness really at all, even though they're telling us constantly, you have to open yourself up, keep yourself open and vulnerability, but that is not it only goes one way. There's only one direction that goes in, and if you have a different perspective, then it's because there's something wrong with you.
Hmm.
And that was the message that you got very clearly from the instructor in the class throughout the book. If you don't buy all of this stuff, it's because you're not doing the work yourself, and there's something wrong with you.
Hmm.
And I, I respectfully disagree, and sometimes not so respectfully disagree when it calls for it. So,
Yeah. Thank
well,
you for sharing
interesting
so much of your
conversation.
time with me.
Yeah,
Yeah. We
yeah,
went way over what we expected to, and I'm sure you have stuff you got to do, so I'll let you go. But I really
yeah,
appreciate this time and going through this book and kind of, I think it's going to be helpful for other people to see
yeah,
if they haven't actually been taught with this. And for the people who have been taught with this, it's probably helpful to hear other people breaking it down. So
yeah,
thanks so
exactly. And
much.
not and not rush through it. Yep.
Yeah, always enjoy speaking with you, and I hope you have a great weekend. And
Thank you.
thanks again.
You too.